Genes, of course, represent one level of our existence, but then, as I pointed out in the cerebellum, we fill up our minds with a lot of knowledge and experience, and there we have, a fair amount of diversity. These technologies will enable us to actually become more different. We won't all be constrained by a brain of very similar architecture with 100 trillion connections organized in several hundred regions in a certain architecture. We can actually change our minds and our brains and our bodies to be more different. In virtual reality, we can express ourselves to be different people. So I think it's actually going to lead to more diversity. We're never going to know everything because the human knowledge is constantly expanding. So we already use our computers to keep track of our knowledge. There's no way we could keep track of it even today without our technology. Our technology will increase, but the amount of knowledge we have to keep track of will grow. So I think another answer to the question is, if there wasn't this sort of expansion of human potential, living a very long time would ultimately get very boring and lead to a deep ennui, sort of a profound boredom. But along with radical life extension is going to come radical life expansion. We're going to be able to expand our experiences and our ability to experience and our ability to reflect on those experiences and our ability to create knowledge in sort of all the forms that I talked about.
This young lady who just asked the question, she is trying to get at the same thing that I'm trying to get at. I think probably most of the people in the room are trying to formulate the same kind of question. There's the most important thing to most people we didn't talk about, and that's their heart and soul. And you didn't mention it all, and so I'm trying to get at a question that can get you to clarify how you see the relationship of your work and your thought to that thing that remains constant throughout the centuries, and that is the importance of the heart and soul, even though the mind is rapidly, there's rapid changes in that level. So let me say that's the best I can state it at this point, and I wondered if you could just comment on that.
Yeah. Well, let me say a couple things. I did mention earlier how the cutting edge of human intelligence are our higher level emotions. It's the most complex thing we do. We've had a little bit of insight into that recently, in that it appears a certain type of cell called the spindle cells are active when we're doing things that involve our higher level emotions. And the spindle cells are interesting in that they're unique, deeply embedded cells. One spindle cell can span the entire brain with hundreds of thousands of dendrites. We won't be able to really understand how they work till we understand all the hundreds of regions they connect to. It's also interesting that only humans and a few apes, a few other species of primates have spindle cells at all. And children don't have spindle cells until the age of somewhere between 1 and 2, and they have them all then by age 3. It correlates very, very well with sort of emotional and moral development in children. But at any rate, our higher level emotions is sort of cutting edge of human intelligence, and part of reverse engineering the brain will, the sort of last frontier will be to understand that cutting edge. Let me say two other things that may relate to your question. My most recent science book was The Age of Spiritual Machines. What I meant by spiritual machines were conscious machines. And really what I'm saying is that when we get to the 2030s, we will have non-biological systems that are as complex and as subtle and are based on the reverse engineering of the human brain and have the complexity and depth of human intelligence, so that we won't really be able to tell the difference when they claim today. You can turn on your kids' video games, and it's a machine, and you've got a character, and the character may claim to be conscious and be happy, glad, angry. Most of them, they seem to be angry. And they're not very convincing because the depth of their emotional reactions is too simple and too easy to sort of figure out that they're not fully compelling. But in the 2030s, they will be fully compelling. They'll have the subtle cues that we associate with real emotional and conscious reactions. That doesn't necessarily prove that they're conscious. There's actually no one of the things I've maintained is that there's no scientific test for consciousness, because consciousness is a synonym for subjectivity, and science is really a synonym for objective and logical deductions from objective measurements, and there's a sort of a distance between objectivity and subjectivity. So I can't really prove that, in fact, other people are conscious, but we have a shared human assumption about that. But it's not a scientific issue. And when we go outside shared human experience, our sort of shared human consensus breaks down. But human beings don't agree on whether animals are conscious. I think higher level animals are conscious, but not everybody agrees with that. But there's no way to really prove that. You can make scientific arguments, look inside the brain of this animal, look at its reactions. It seems like a human reaction, but there's no way to ultimately prove that. When we have non-biological systems that are actually more human than animals are, because they're based on reverse engineering of human intelligence, that will be even more of an issue. But my prediction is that the machines will convince most people that they are conscious. They'll get mad at us if we don't believe them. They'll be clever enough to convince us. They'll have a lot of influence in our world because they'll be deeply embedded in our world. And as I pointed out, there's not going to be a clear distinction between human and machine. It's going to be all integrated and mixed up. We're going to have machines that are derived from human beings and act very human. We're going to have humans that have a lot of non-biological processes going on inside their bodies and brains. It's not going to be a clear distinction. The other point I would make about spirituality is if you consider the concept of God, how is God described in all of our religious texts? Generally, it's described as being infinite in certain qualities, like creativity, intelligence, all-knowing, infinitely beautiful, infinitely loving. All of these various qualities, this concept of God is described as being without limitation. What do we see in an evolutionary process? We see that entities, as they evolve through biological and technological evolution, become more complex and become more intelligent and become more creative, become more capable of higher level emotions like love, and they become more beautiful, actually. So an evolutionary process actually grows in these qualities, and actually it's an exponential process. It grows exponentially in these qualities. Now, it never achieves infinite levels, so it never becomes truly godlike, but it is moving in that direction, so you can consider an evolutionary process and everything I've been talking about as a spiritual process, because it's growing closer to this ideal. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but thank you very much.